Sophia Loren has finally ended the speculation. Her connection with Cary Grant was the great love of her youth that she consciously chose not to claim. After more than 60 years of carefully worded denials, wistful glances in interviews, and Hollywood whispers that have grown into legend, here is the reason her story will remain a beautiful, unfinished sentence. For Sophia, it came down to one word: loyalty. Not the blind loyalty of a starstruck girl, but the fierce, deliberate loyalty of a woman who understood that some promises are made to yourself. It was a choice between a dazzling dream and a foundational truth, and she chose the foundation, a decision that has defined her entire life. From post-war Rome to the pinnacle of Hollywood's golden age, this is how Sophia Loren became the woman who could make that call and live with it, with unshakable grace. Sure, we all know Sophia Loren as the earthy, incandescent Italian goddess who conquered Hollywood with a look that could melt steel. But long before that, she was Sofia Villani Ciccolone, a child of scarcity, born into the rubble of war-torn Rome on September 20th, 1934. Her mother, Romilda Villani, was a piano teacher and aspiring actress whose own Hollywood dreams had been dashed by her family's refusal to let her travel to America for a screen test with MGM. That unfulfilled ambition hung in the air of their small apartment, a scent of what could have been that was as palpable as the smell of cooking garlic and damp stone. Raised in the poverty-stricken outskirts of Pozzuoli, near Naples, Sophia and her younger sister, Maria, knew the gnaw of hunger, while they shared a single room with their grandmother, and sometimes their aunt and uncle, a tangle of limbs and shared breath in a space too small for hope. Money was so non-existent that she was once cruelly nicknamed stuzzicadente, toothpick, for her scrawny frame. The war years were a blur of blackouts, air raid sirens, and the constant search for food. She has spoken of seeing her mother trade her wedding ring for a sack of flour, an early, brutal lesson in value and survival. Her grandmother, a formidable woman who had seen her own share of hardship, would tell her stories, instilling in her a sense of pride and resilience that would become her armor. At 14, her future arrived in an unlikely form: a beauty contest. She entered the Queen of the Sea pageant in Naples, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. The prize wasn't a crown. It was a small amount of cash, and more importantly, movie screen tests. She didn't win, but she placed as a finalist, and her striking, melancholic beauty caught the eye of film producer Pietro Torrisi. Here's where it gets complicated. Her mother, Romilda, saw this as the last train out of Pozzuoli. She began managing Sophia's career with a ferocity that bordered on obsession, changing her name to the more sophisticated and internationally palatable Sophia Loren. It was a symbolic act, shedding the past like a snakeskin. By 15, she was appearing as an extra in low-budget Italian films, a face in the crowd in movies like Totò, Peppino e la Malafemmina. She was learning the craft, not in a classroom, but on the soundstages of Cinecittà, watching, absorbing, and waiting for her moment. She wasn't just a pretty face, that she was a survivor, and that grit, forged in the crucible of poverty, would become the bedrock of her iconic persona. Sophia's career wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, deliberate burn that finally ignited when she met the man who would see her soul, director Vittorio De Sica. In 1953, they began a professional and personal relationship that would define her legacy. He looked at her and didn't just see a spectacular figure. He saw the peasant girl, the worried daughter, the resilient woman. Their first major collaboration, The Gold of Naples, 1954, was a turning point. In the segment Pizze a Credito, Sophia played a fiery, determined pizza vendor, a role that allowed her to blend raw sensuality with the authentic, earthy humor of a Neapolitan streetwise woman. It was a glimpse of the star she could become. De Sica famously told her, "You must learn to feel with your eyes, to think with your heart." It was a lesson she took to heart, a philosophy that would inform her most iconic work. But step back and look closer. It was two women, Lazio Chiara, in 1960 that transformed her from a major star into an immortal artist. The role of Cecilia, a mother trying to protect her young daughter from the brutal realities of World War II, was a crucible. Sophia stripped away every ounce of glamour to portray a woman facing unimaginable horror. The scene where she and her daughter are raped by Allied soldiers, Goumiers, is not exploitative. It is a harrowing, visceral depiction of trauma that still carries the power to shock. Her performance was so profound, so universally understood, that it transcended language. And when she won the Academy Award for Best Actress, it was a watershed moment. She was the first actor to win an Oscar for a foreign language performance. The ceremony in Santa Monica is the stuff of legend. She wore a breathtaking, billowing white Givenchy dress, and as her name was announced, the camera caught her face a mixture of shock, overwhelming joy, and the memory of every hardship she had endured. Her acceptance speech was a tearful, breathless whisper. Grazie, thank you so much. Hollywood, the town that had once tried to change her, was now at her feet. By the mid-1960s, Sophia was a global phenomenon, commanding $1 million per film, an astronomical sum that placed her in the same financial bracket as her male counterparts. Her partnership with Marcello Mastroianni created one of cinema's most beloved pairings, in films like Marriage Italian Style and Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. Their chemistry was so natural, so alive with bickering affection, that audiences believed they must be a couple in real life. They weren't, but their on-screen magic defined a certain kind of European passion for the world. In one famous scene from Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, Sophia performs a striptease for Mastroianni's character, a moment that is both comically erotic and deeply human, a perfect encapsulation of their dynamic. Yet, even as she conquered international cinema, Sophia remained fiercely Italian. She turned down roles that required her to shed her accent, or play a generic Americanized version of a woman. She understood that her difference was her strength. Her identity was not a costume to be put on and taken off. It was the core of her power. Sophia's romantic life was never a simple fairy tale. It was a complex narrative of passion, legal battles, and unwavering commitment. The central figure was not Cary Grant, but Carlo Ponti. They met in 1950, when she was just 15, and he was a 37-year-old film producer. He saw her potential immediately, but their connection was fraught with obstacles. Ponti was married, though separated, and Italy's rigid laws, which did not recognize divorce, made their future a legal and ethical minefield. For years, their relationship was a quiet, open secret in Rome's film circles. Ponti became her mentor, her protector, and the architect of her career, guiding her choices and shielding her from the more predatory aspects of the industry. He was the first man, she later said, who treated her like a lady, not just a beautiful object. He was calm, young, intelligent, and deeply rooted in a sense of tradition that appealed to the daughter of Pozzuoli. Then, in 1957, Hollywood came calling in the form of The Pride and Prejudice, released in the U.S. as An Affair to Remember. Her co-star was Cary Grant, the epitome of suave, sophisticated English charm. He was one of the biggest movie stars in the world, a man who had everything. On screen, their chemistry was a force of nature. The scene where he sings An Affair to Remember to her, his voice filled with a tenderness that felt unscripted, is cinematic perfection. But behind the scenes, something even more potent was unfolding. Grant, recently divorced from his third wife, the actress Betsy Drake, found himself utterly captivated by his Italian co-star. He was used to women being starstruck, but Sophia was different. She was direct, unimpressed by his fame, and possessed a fiery self-possession that enchanted him. He was, at the time, undergoing psychotherapy and experimenting with LSD, searching for a deeper meaning in life, and he seemed to find a grounding force in Sophia's earthy realism. During filming, he proposed. It wasn't a casual suggestion. It was a serious, heartfelt offer of marriage. He proposed more than once. Sophia was genuinely torn. Here was the ultimate Hollywood prize. Marriage to Cary Grant would cement her status in America and offer a life of unimaginable glamour. But here's where it gets complicated. Her heart and her history were with Carlo Ponti. Ponti represented her past, her struggle, her Italian identity. He had believed in her when she was nobody. Grant represented a different future, a glittering American dream. In the end, she chose the foundation over the dream. She and Ponti attempted to marry in 1957 in a civil ceremony, but the news leaked, and Ponti was charged with bigamy in Italy. They were forced to have the marriage annulled. The scandal was immense. For years, they lived in exile, unable to return to their homeland. It wasn't until 1966, after Ponti obtained French citizenship and a French divorce, that they were able to legally marry again. Their union lasted 50 years, until his death in 2007. It was a testament to a love that had survived legal threats, public scandal, and the immense pressures of international fame. The pattern was clear. Despite the temptations and the what-ifs, her loyalty was to the man who had been her partner in the building of a life, not just the making of a movie. By the late 1960s, Sophia Loren had earned the right to be unapologetically herself, and the world was better for it. In an era when studios expected their female stars to be pliable, polite, and perpetually on, Sophia became refreshingly, powerfully unfiltered. Her candor wasn't a performance. It was an extension of the survival instincts she'd learned in Pozzuoli. A famous example comes from a 1965 press conference. A reporter, in a thinly veiled attempt to comment on her famous curves, asked about her diet and exercise regimen. Sophia didn't miss a beat. "Everything you see, I owe to spaghetti," she declared with a mischievous smile. This wasn't just a clever quip. It was a declaration of ownership. It was her way of saying, "This is my body, my heritage, my strength. I will not apologize for it. Oh, and I will not starve it to fit your mold." Her refusal to play the Hollywood game extended to the set itself. During the filming of the epic The Fall of the Roman Empire in 1964, she clashed with director Anthony Mann. He wanted her in costumes that were historically inaccurate, but designed to showcase her physique. Sophia, who had a deep respect for history and for her own dignity, refused. She argued for more authentic, less revealing attire. The standoff was significant. It wasn't just about a costume. It was about an actress demanding to be treated as a collaborator, not a prop. But step back and look closer. Audiences didn't just tolerate her candor. They respected it. When she spoke openly about the pay disparity between male and female stars, in a 1970 interview, she wasn't reading from a feminist script. She was speaking from hard-won experience, detailing how she was consistently paid less than her male co-stars despite being the main international box office draw. This honesty made her relatable. She wasn't an untouchable goddess on a pedestal. She was a woman fighting for her worth in a man's world. This unapologetic approach to her career and public persona made her more than just a beautiful actress. It made her a symbol of integrity. She famously turned down the lead role of Mrs. Robinson in The Graduate, 1967. The part went to the brilliant Anne Bancroft, but Sophia's reasoning was telling. She felt the character was too cynical, too negative, and didn't align with the values of womanhood and motherhood she cherished. She chose projects that celebrated resilience, passion, and family, and even if they were less commercially edgy. In a town that often rewarded conformity, Sophia's greatest act of rebellion was being relentlessly, unapologetically herself. The fundamental tension between Sophia Loren and the Hollywood machine was a battle for control. Studio executives in the 1950s and 60s were accustomed to being puppet masters. They discovered talent, molded their images, controlled their salaries, and dictated their personal lives through restrictive morality clauses. They were unprepared for an Italian actress who arrived with her own manager, her own sense of self, and a fierce protective instinct honed by years of poverty. The conflict reached its apex during her contract negotiations with Paramount in the mid-1960s. The studio, having profited immensely from her films, wanted to lock her into a long-term deal that gave them significant control over her future projects, her endorsements, and even her public appearances. They offered her a great deal of money, assuming that would be enough. It wasn't. For Sophia, it came down to one word: dignity. She refused to sign away the autonomy she and Carlo Ponti had fought so hard to achieve. This wasn't just a financial negotiation. It was a philosophical stand. She had seen how the system could chew people up and spit them out. She would not be another casualty. The most telling example of this mindset was her decision regarding Cary Grant. On paper, a marriage to Cary Grant was the ultimate power move. It would have solidified her status in America, aligned her with one of Hollywood's most respected figures, and guaranteed her a place in the pantheon of Hollywood royalty. But Sophia understood something the executives didn't. Her power came from her authenticity, not from her associations. Marrying Grant would have been a merger. Staying with Ponti was a partnership. She chose the partnership. The studio system's attempt to Americanize her failed spectacularly. They wanted her to lose weight, dye her hair blonde, and take elocution lessons to erase her accent. She refused every single suggestion. She kept her voluptuous figure, her dark hair, and her accent, turning what the studios saw as liabilities into her most marketable assets. By the 1970s, Sophia had effectively won the war. She had achieved what few international stars ever managed: near complete control over her career. Alongside Ponti, she formed her own production company, Compagnia Cinematografica, Champion. They chose projects that interested them, investing their own money and taking the risks themselves. This independence meant she appeared in fewer American films as the decade progressed, but it preserved something far more valuable: her artistic soul and her personal freedom. She had bent the Hollywood system to her will, not by breaking it, but by refusing to let it break her. At 91, Sophia Loren has finally pulled back the velvet curtain on her relationship with Cary Grant, but only a few inches. In a series of carefully considered interviews in her later years, she has moved beyond the standard, "we were just good friends" line to a more nuanced, and therefore more truthful, acknowledgement. She admits the chemistry was real, that his proposals were sincere, and that he was a magnificent, nay complicated man who held a special place in her heart. But she stops there, drawing a line in the sand of history. The truth, as Sophia now tells it, is that their relationship was a perfect, beautiful moment in time that was never meant to be stretched into a lifetime. Grant represented a gilded American dream, a life of cocktail parties and Beverly Hills mansions that could have been hers had she simply said yes. But for Sophia, it came down to one word: loyalty. This loyalty was multi-layered. First, there was her loyalty to Carlo Ponti. He was her anchor, the man who had navigated her through the treacherous waters of fame and scandal. To abandon him for the flashier, more famous Grant would have been, in her mind, an act of profound betrayal. It would have invalidated their entire shared history of struggle and sacrifice. Second, there was her loyalty to herself. Sophia was, at her core, an Italian woman. Her identity, her values, her very essence were rooted in the culture of family, food, and fierce commitment that she had brought from Pozzuoli. A life with Cary Grant, as wonderful as it might have been, would have been a life lived in a different language, a different culture. It would have required her to become someone else. Here's where it gets complicated. The real reason Sophia will never reveal every detail about their time together isn't about protecting Grant's legacy or her own. It's about protecting the sacredness of human connection. She understands that some of the most meaningful experiences in life lose their magic when they are over-explained. To dissect their relationship in a tell-all memoir or a sensational interview would be to reduce it to a collection of anecdotes and gossip. It would be to commodify a memory that she holds dear. Her partial revelations admitting the proposals, the depth of their affection, but never crossing the line into salacious detail, reflect a profound understanding of emotional ecology. Some feelings are like rare flowers. They wither under too much exposure. In an era of social media, oversharing, and celebrity tell-alls where every private moment is monetized, Sophia's restraint feels almost revolutionary. She has never written a kiss-and-tell book. She has never participated in a reality show. She has never sold her private moments to the highest bidder. This isn't because she's a prude or old-fashioned. It's because she understands that the value of a life is not measured in how much of it you can make public. It's measured in the quality of the connections you forge and the integrity with which you honor them. Her relationship with Cary Grant was real, it was deep, and it was fleeting. And in choosing to keep the full truth to herself, she has given it a kind of immortality that no public confession ever could. At 91, Sophia Loren exists in a state of graceful, earned quiet. The chaos and velocity that once defined her life, wartime hunger, sudden fame, international scrutiny have softened into something measured and deliberate. The girl who grew up amid deprivation in Pozzuoli, the young woman molded and tested by the Italian film industry, and the global star who conquered Hollywood have all receded into memory. What remains is a woman who has nothing left to prove and no desire to perform her life for an audience. She divides her time between her home in Geneva, Switzerland, and Italy, the country that shaped her and never stopped claiming her as its own. These places are not backdrops for public consumption, but sanctuaries of routine and reflection. Family is now her center of gravity. Her sons anchor her world. Carlo Jr., an accomplished conductor with an international career, and Eduardo, a film director whose work bridges intimacy and craft. It was Eduardo who guided her back to the screen in 2020, directing her in The Life Ahead, a return that felt less like a comeback and more like a quiet affirmation of purpose. Sophia Loren no longer chases attention, but attention still finds her. Her public appearances are rare, and because of that rarity, they carry weight. When she steps into a room at a film festival or awards ceremony, the atmosphere shifts. Conversations pause. Cameras lower for a moment before rising again. It is not nostalgia that commands this response. It is presence. True star power does not fade with age. It deepens, accumulating meaning rather than losing it. Loren's presence is undiminished because it is no longer tied to youth or beauty. It is tied to endurance. Her performance in The Life Ahead made that clear. At 86, she took on the role of Madame Rosa, a Holocaust survivor and former sex worker who cares for the children of other marginalized women. The character demanded emotional exposure without the shield of vanity. Loren offered exactly that. There was no attempt to soften age, no effort to romanticize suffering. All the performance was raw, restrained, and devastating in its honesty. It drew from a lifetime of lived experience rather than technical display. The Golden Globe nomination that followed 7 decades after her first screen test felt less like an accolade and more like recognition of a sustained artistic truth. The artist in her was not preserved for nostalgia. She was still working, still responding, still alive. That same clarity defines how Loren speaks about her past, particularly the relationship that has followed her like a long shadow, her connection to Cary Grant. Nearly 70 years have passed since that chapter of her life, and time has transformed it. What once carried intensity and uncertainty has settled into something gentler. When asked about Grant today, Loren does not bristle or deflect. She speaks with warmth and perspective, recalling a brilliant, generous friend from a distant period of her life. The urgency is gone. What remains is affection tempered by distance. She has outlived Grant by more than 3 decades, long enough to watch their brief connection be mythologized, romanticized, and endlessly analyzed. Biographers and historians have turned it into a symbolic crossroads. The great American star versus the Italian producer husband. But Loren has never accepted that framing. From her vantage point now, the narrative reveals less about romance than about how people misunderstand choice. She does not regret choosing Carlo Ponti over Cary Grant. Not because Grant lacked importance, but because Ponti was not a counterfactual. He was the life she lived. Ponti was her partner in building, surviving, enduring scandal, Wonka exile, and eventual legitimacy. Their marriage lasted half a century, weathering legal battles and public judgment. For Loren, elevating any other relationship above that reality would be dishonest not only to Ponti, but to herself. Her refusal to sensationalize her relationship with Grant is often misread as secrecy. In truth, it is precision. She acknowledges what existed without inflating it beyond proportion. She honors Grant without exploiting him. This balanced acknowledgement without excess has become her signature approach to memory. She understands that not every truth gains value through exposure. Some truths lose their meaning when flattened into anecdotes. This philosophy reaches its fullest expression in her unwavering decision never to reveal the full truth about Cary Grant. That stance is not born of stubbornness or fear. It is born of respect. Respect for Grant's own devotion to privacy, respect for the marriage that defined her adult life, and respect for the complexity of human relationships, which rarely conform to clean narratives or satisfying conclusions. In an era where every celebrity relationship becomes content, dissected in real time, monetized through speculation, reduced to viral soundbites, Loren's restraint feels almost radical. She understands that intimacy is fragile, that the most meaningful connections often exist in the unspoken, in glances, in silences, in moments never meant to be archived. Once exposed to constant public scrutiny, those moments lose their texture. To explain everything would be to diminish it. Her boundary is not about hiding truth. It is about protecting it from trivialization. Loren has lived long enough to see how stories mutate once released into public circulation. She knows that once a private memory becomes a headline, it no longer belongs to the people who lived it. It becomes something else, simplified, exaggerated, distorted. This approach mirrors the larger arc of her life. Sophia Loren has consistently chosen substance over spectacle. She chose longevity over immediacy. She chose partnership over symbolism. Even in her youth, when glamour surrounded her, she was never seduced by the idea of being consumed. She wanted a life, not a legend. Ironically, that decision is precisely what made her legendary. Her legacy will not be defined by a choice between 2 great men. It will be defined by how she loved, with intensity, with loyalty, and with an unwavering internal compass. She built a life that integrated passion and discipline, ambition and restraint. She did not chase myth. She lived reality fully and allowed history to catch up later. At 91, Sophia Loren stands as evidence that dignity is not passive. It is an active, lifelong practice. She has chosen what to give the world and what to keep for herself. And that final boundary, her silence about Cary Grant, is not a refusal. It is a conclusion, a full circle drawn not by secrecy, but by wisdom. That is why the full truth will never be revealed. Not because it is hidden, but because it has already served its purpose. And in preserving it, Sophia Loren preserves the very thing that has defined her life, more than fame ever could: meaning. If stories of classic Hollywood and the complex Human lives behind the carefully constructed glamour interest you? Stick around, there's more where this came from. The truth about our icons is often far more fascinating and far more human than the myths we've created around them.